to The Walk. Today I'd like to talk about the judges. Now in Israel, before there were kings, there were judges, and the judges were different than kings. The judges did not have royal succession. It wasn't a father to a son or a daughter to a son or a daughter. It was like popcorn. Someone from here, someone from here, someone from here, someone from there. Each generation, God chose a new person according to their gifts and according to the need of the nation at the time. The nation also, I say the nation, it wasn't really united as a nation. These were tribes that were still maintaining their autonomy. They were together, Israel, but they weren't united until the kings. So we started off now with Moses and Joshua. In Joshua it says, this book of the law will not depart out of your mouth, but you'll meditate it on it day and night. And it was talking about scripture, Torah. And so that became the important thing for every leader, was to have this Torah of God, to meditate it on it day and night, and to have that a scroll that they always would refer to and keep fresh so that they could judge the people. Judges were chosen by their military prowess and being a prophet. So they had to have the gift of prophecy from the Lord, but they also usually had some sort of military benefit to the nation, because salvation back then was very physical and there were all these other nations fighting with them all the time. They needed some kind of military leadership for their existence. And that was very tied together, prophet and military leadership. So the first one was Othniel from Judah. The second was Ehud, a Benjamite, and he was left-handed. It mentions he also served as a hitman, getting rid of a very bad and evil king. After him was a man by the name of Shamgar. He was believed to have been a Hittite. His name meant sword. However, he was famous for what he did without one. He defeated the Philistines, killed 600 with a cattle prod. He was pretty amazing. Alongside him, and ruling in the north at the same time, was a chieftainess called Jael. She comes into the story later on with the story of Deborah. So after Shamgar comes Deborah. Her name means the bee, like the buzzy bee. Deborah has a song of Deborah, and it's like a poem of triumph and praise to God. And she explains a lot of what happened. She also says that the highways were overgrown and unused until I, Deborah, arose. People were fearful. People didn't want to stand up for themselves or their nation or to fight until she came and inspired people. She was a prophet, and the generals under her, I say under her because they looked up to her, like Barak, he wouldn't go to war without her. And he says, I'm not going to war unless you come with me. And she says, if I do, the war is going to be credited to the victory of a woman. And it seems like she's talking about herself, but actually it was more than just her, because although she and Barak, they came with the army and they routed the enemy, and the general ran, and he ran to Jael, this chieftainess of the north. He ran to her for some kind of sanctuary, and then she dispatches of him. The women took the day, so that wasn't too bad. Gideon was the next one that came along, and he was from the tribe of Manasseh. He was also known as the name Jerubbaal. He's known for leading the army for God, reducing in number the troops. God kept saying, you have too many men, you have too many men. And he's reducing, saying, God, we're outnumbered already. And then God took just the most courageous and passionate warriors, and instead of fighting, they took their horns, they took torches, and they took jugs. And at nighttime, they blew the horn, woke up the enemy, smashed the jug with a torch underneath, and all of a sudden, light came from nowhere with the big noise. The enemy panicked and slaughtered themselves. So this was seen as a very heroic victory. God used him, and the people looked up to him because of this. Gideon became like a king to the people. In fact, they said he looked kingly, and his son, he had 70 sons. One of them from a slave was called Abimelech, which means my father's a king. So Gideon was getting a little bit more confident by now. And that son ended up killing all of his brothers and proclaiming himself king. He actually reigned for 3 years over Manasseh as a king. And so he was a king in Israel, but not of Israel, just in Manasseh. After him, which was a very tragic story there, we have to remember that Gideon was asked by the people, will you and your sons rule over us? He was offered kingship, and he said, no, God will rule over you. I and my sons will not. So he did defer that whole crown of kingship and said, God will rule you. He also, though, made a gold ephod that became a snare to the people, like an idol. And in Hebrew, it was said to be a mokesh, which means literally ruination. Sad ending to a very triumphant person. After him came Tola. A humble man was then raised up to get Israel in line after this whole episode with Abimelech and Gideon. And his name literally meant worm or grub. So he was a humble man from the get-go. He was from Issachar. Then there was Jair from Manasseh. And after that was Jephthah. We might know of him. He was also from Manasseh. He was a illegitimate outcast. His brothers threw him out because he was son of a prostitute, but he became a mighty man of war. And so they asked him then to please save us. We need a mighty man of war. And he became a judge of Israel because he brought victory to the land. But also he's known, and more tragically, as the one who offered to sacrifice his daughter if they won the battle, and they did. One line of thought says that he sacrificed his daughter, but the other line of thought says, well, let's look deeper into the actual Hebrew of it. And there's a word that can be and or in Hebrew. And so basically they're saying what it really says is when he got home, he said, God, whatever comes out of my home, I will give to you and sacrifice as a burnt offering. But in Hebrew, it says, I will give to you whoever comes out and a burnt offering, but not that person. So as a judge, he wouldn't have done that. After him is Ibzan from Bethlehem, North Judah. Then there's Elon of Zebulun. See all these different places. God is scattering the leadership from all over the country. Abdon from Ephraim, who had 40 sons and 30 grandsons. Samson from the line of Dan. He was born special. Everyone else was born lowly and of no consequence, but God did mighty things through them. And that's what made the judges great, is God was the great, not the people. God worked through them, and the people could see that. And they'll say, okay, God is with you. You look like a mighty man of valor, but we know that it's actually God working through you. And I think even with Samson, even though he was special, they knew it was God made him special. When Samuel comes along, there was a lot of faith in Samuel, but Samuel did a great job. However, his sons, Joel and Abiah, were wicked. He didn't do so great with the parenting. And we have to remember, all of these heroes in the Bible are just human. So they're not above reproach. And although Samuel did some wonderful things, he kind of had some difficulty with the kids. And these guys took bribes and were very corrupt. And Samuel, instead of saying, God, you appoint who you want over your people, he said, oh, these are my sons. I'm going to appoint them. Not because they're righteous, but because they're my sons. So there's a little bit of that nepotism coming in that wasn't really helpful. And the people said, enough. Time out. We don't want this anymore. This is a problem because when they requested a king, things kind of crumbled for Samuel. This was the end of the time of the judges and ushered in the time of the kings. And this was a very painful time for Samuel and also for the people and God seeing what they really wanted. Samuel says, they're rejecting me. They're rejecting my lineage. I have appointed my son. He was kind of making his own little dynasty, mind you, his little royal lineage here. He's having his kids take after him on the leadership. And they said no. So he took it personal, of rejecting me. And God says, they're not rejecting you, Samuel, they're rejecting me. And we think, why are they saying that they're going to reject God by not wanting corrupt leadership? I don't want corrupt leadership. So if I reject corrupt leadership, am I rejecting God? Because they were just saying, we don't want Samuel's sons, we want a king. But that's not what they were saying. They weren't saying, we don't want corrupt leadership, because if they have a king, they're going to have 10 times the corrupt leadership. They were saying we wanted a king like other nations. And that was the problem. In Deuteronomy 17, verse 15, it says, you must then appoint a king whom God your Lord shall choose. They were going to pick a king. It was told in Deuteronomy. It wasn't wrong to ask for a king, but how they were rejecting God was they wanted a king like other nations, where God is not the ruler through the person anymore. All this time, we had all this list of judges, but you know what was the common thread? They weren't the real leader. God was. God was the leader this whole time. And even having a king, God could still be the leader if it was the right kind of king, but they wanted a king like other nations. See, before this, with all these judges, the power of God was invisible. God's strength through these people was something you couldn't see God's strength. You just see a simple person. And therefore God was glorified, because it's obviously not this person doing all these wonderful miracles. It's God behind them and working through them. And God got the glory. People didn't want the invisible power anymore. They said, we wanted a king like other nations. They wanted the pompous, full of gold and everyone scraping and bowing, and all of the riches and the wealth attributed to this celebrity. They wanted that for themselves. They go, well, look at our celebrity. We have one too. What does this remind us of? And this goes all the way back to right after crossing the Red Sea. Moses was upset to see that he was up getting the commandments from Sinai. He comes down. People didn't want the invisible power of God anymore. They wanted something they could see, and they built the golden calf. And here they did it again. They didn't want the invisible power that they couldn't see. They wanted a visible golden king like other nations. So this is just a quick run through of the judges. But what does this mean for us today? A lot of times we also are looking for the physical and the invisible power of God that works through our lives in the humble, simple things. Sometimes we don't see it or choose not to. Sometimes we also want to go for the glittery, powerful, attention-grabbing things in life. Things that have success or money or represent power in a very physical way. Those things attract us very much. We have to remember lessons like this. Think of the judges where God did powerful things through the simple. And then when people wanted a king like other nations, they started wanting this big physical hoopla and wonderful glittery golden excitement. We have to always remember too, ask ourselves, what are we choosing in life? Or what are we following? What's getting our attention? Is it this wonderful, spectacular thing over here? Or is it the true, real power of God working in our lives through the simple and the mundane all around us? Let's be a little bit conscious to make that recognition and have our choices in the right place. Now we'll go on to the kings. This was just a little overview of the judges, and let's see where a study of the kings takes us. It's very interesting.